It was a cold Tuesday morning in February, sitting in my office with a compliance file open on my screen, when the phone rang and the name on the caller ID stopped my hand halfway to the receiver. My name is Rachel, and 5 years earlier, my husband Mark walked out of our marriage, and through a divorce settlement his lawyer engineered far better than mine, left me with almost nothing. Not the house, not the savings we'd built together over 11 years. Not even, in the end, much of my own dignity, because Mark made sure that by the time our friends and family heard his version of the story, I was the unstable one, the difficult one, the reason things fell apart. The truth was simpler and far less flattering to him. Mark had been having an affair for over a year with a coworker named Denise before I found out. When I confronted him, instead of showing remorse, he doubled down, told me I'd driven him to it with my constant nagging about his hours and his phone habits, the very things I later realized that were red flags I'd been too afraid to fully name. I thought that was the worst part. I was wrong, because the divorce itself became its own kind of devastation. Mark's family had money, and he hired a lawyer who specialized in exactly the kind of aggressive, drawn-out proceedings that wear down the other side financially and emotionally. I couldn't afford that level of representation. My lawyer, a decent but overworked public family attorney, did his best, but he was outmatched at every turn. Mark's team found ways to undervalue the house, to argue that my years as a stay-at-home parent during our children's early years meant I'd contributed less financially and therefore deserved less. In the end, I walked away with a small settlement, partial custody of our two children, and a mountain of legal debt. I remember sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot after the final hearing, hands shaking on the steering wheel, wondering how I was going to rebuild a life from what felt like nothing, but I did rebuild it. Slowly, painfully, one decision at a time. I'd worked part-time in banking compliance before the kids were born, and I reached back into that experience, taking a junior compliance analyst position at a mid-sized financial services firm called Coastal Trust Financial. It paid less than I needed at first, but it was something, and I was determined to claw my way back to stability for my children's sake, if nothing else. I wish I had known then how far that decision would eventually take me. Over the next 5 years, I threw myself into that career with an intensity that surprised even me. Compliance work suited something in my personality I hadn't fully tapped into before. The same attention to detail that Mark used to mock as obsessive when I organized our finances turned out to be exactly the skill set that made me exceptional at spotting regulatory red flags, inconsistencies, and risk exposures that others missed. Within 2 years, I was promoted to Senior Compliance Officer. By year 4, I was Director of Regulatory Compliance, overseeing licensing reviews, background investigations, and regulatory filings for the entire firm. Meanwhile, my relationship with Mark existed mostly through custody exchanges and occasional terse text messages about the kids' schedules. He'd stayed with Denise for about 18 months before that relationship ended too, something I learned secondhand through our son, who mentioned it casually the way kids do, without understanding the weight the information carried for me. Then something happened that changed everything. Not dramatically, not all at once, but through a single phone call on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. Coastal Trust Financial, Compliance Department, this is Rachel, I answered, still half-focused on the file open on my screen. There was a pause on the other end. Rachel? It's Mark. My stomach dropped in a way I hadn't expected after 5 years. Mark? What's going on? Is it the kids? No, the kids are fine, he said quickly. Actually, this is strange. I'm calling about a job. I'm interviewing for a position at Holloway Securities, and they said their new advisor licensing has to go through your firm's compliance review process since you handle their outsourced background checks now. Someone told me the review was being handled by a Rachel in your department, and I didn't think it would be you. I sat back in my chair, processing this. Coastal Trust had, in fact, taken on a new contract 8 months earlier, providing compliance and licensing verification services for several partner firms, including Holloway Securities. I hadn't made the connection because I hadn't seen his application yet. It was somewhere in the queue, one of dozens I'd review that month. I'll need to review the file through normal process, Mark, I said, keeping my voice level. I can't discuss specifics over the phone. Right, of course, he said, and I could hear something unfamiliar in his voice. Nervousness, maybe even fear. I just wanted to reach out directly, since we know each other. Make sure there's no awkwardness affecting things. I told him I'd handle it professionally, the same as I would any application, and ended the call. What I discovered a few days later left me speechless. Mark's employment history over the past 3 years, since leaving his previous firm, showed significant gaps he hadn't fully explained on his application. When I dug into the required background disclosures, I found that he'd been let go from his position at his previous firm, not resigned voluntarily, as his application implied, but terminated following an internal investigation into misrepresented client portfolio performance reports. The details were serious enough that regulatory disclosure was required, and Mark had significantly understated the circumstances on his new application, a violation that could disqualify him entirely if left unaddressed or worse, expose him to further regulatory action if discovered later by an actual examiner instead of caught in internal review. I sat with that file for a long time, the same way I had years earlier when I'd first learned about Denise, this strange, sick feeling of a second betrayal being uncovered, except this time I wasn't the victim. I was the one holding information that could end his career entirely. I thought about the years after our divorce, the child support payments that came late more often than not, the times he'd claimed financial hardship to reduce his obligations, while I now realized hiding a job termination that would have made his hardship claims look very different in family court. I thought about the version of events he'd spread to our mutual friends, the story where I was unstable and difficult, while he quietly built an entire narrative of victimhood on a foundation that, professionally at least, was built on a lie. I could have buried him. Professionally, ethically, I had every justification to flag the discrepancy exactly as I found it, let the compliance process run its course, and watch his application get denied, possibly along with regulatory consequences for the misrepresentation itself. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I requested a formal compliance interview, the standard next step in cases involving unresolved application discrepancies, and I made sure it went through the normal review committee rather than handling it unilaterally myself, even though as director, I technically could have. The interview took place 2 weeks later, myself and two colleagues from the Compliance Review Board. Mark walked in, wearing the same confident suit he used to wear to divorce hearings, but something in his posture had changed, smaller, more uncertain. Mr. Delgado, I said, using the formal address deliberately, we've identified a discrepancy between your disclosed employment history and the actual circumstances of your departure from Whitfield Advisory Group. Can you walk us through what happened there? I watched him swallow hard before answering. He gave a version that was, notably, more honest than his application had been, admitting there had been some issues with client reporting, though he minimized his own role in it as much as he could. One of my colleagues, a sharp compliance reviewer named Patricia, pressed further, and slowly the full picture emerged. Mark hadn't been the sole architect of the misrepresented reports, but he had signed off on them, knowing they contained inflated performance figures, under pressure from a manager who was later also terminated. It wasn't the worst possible version of events, but it was serious, and his application's omission of it was, on its own, a significant violation. After he left the room, the committee discussed the findings. Given the full context, his admission, the mitigating circumstances of manager pressure, and his clean record in the years since. The committee's recommendation wasn't outright disqualification, but a formal condition, disclosed probationary licensing status for 18 months, mandatory additional compliance training, and full transparency to his new employer about the circumstances. It fell to me as director to deliver the outcome and, more specifically, to obtain his signature on the disclosure and probation agreement, the exact document that would either allow him to move forward with the job or end the opportunity entirely if he refused to sign. I called him in for that final meeting alone. I could have ended this for you, I told him, sliding the document across the table. You lied about why you left your last job. You know that's what happened. If I just flagged it and walked away, this conversation would be very different right now. He stared at the document for a long moment before looking up at me. Why didn't you? Because burying you the way you tried to bury me after the divorce isn't actually who I want to be, I said. I let the process work the way it's supposed to work. You got a fair review. Mitigate systems were censored, and now you have a path forward, if you're honest about it going forward. That's more than you gave me 5 years ago. His hand hovered over the pen for a moment. You could have just approved it quietly. No one would have known there was ever an issue. I'm not you, Mark, I said quietly. I don't build my life on things people don't know about. He signed the document. Holloway Securities was informed of the probationary conditions as required, and to my knowledge, he completed the required training and has kept his position since, under closer oversight than he was probably comfortable with, but employed. I didn't tell our children the full story. It wasn't something they needed to carry, and honestly, by that point, I didn't need them to see me as someone who'd won against their father. I just needed them to keep seeing me as someone steady, someone who showed up, someone who'd rebuilt a life worth being proud of. That night, driving home from the office, I thought about the woman I'd been in that courthouse parking lot 5 years earlier, hands shaking, wondering how she'd survive what felt like losing everything. She could never have imagined sitting across a conference table one day, holding real power over the same man who'd once made her feel like nothing, and actually choosing, not to destroy him with it. Mark took the house. He took the savings. For a long time, I let him take my sense of who I was too. But in the end, the only thing that mattered was what I built back on my own, out of what was left. And that was the day I stopped being anyone's victim, including my own. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 months after that meeting, I got a call from Patricia, the compliance reviewer who'd sat in on Mark's interview. She wanted to talk to me privately off the record before bringing something to the full committee. My stomach tightened immediately, some old instinct still half expecting bad news whenever Mark's name came up in any context. What she told me left me speechless all over again, though not in the way I expected. Holloway Securities had flagged an issue with a different advisor, someone who'd joined the firm around the same time as Mark, and during their internal review, Mark's name had come up. Not as someone implicated, but as the person who'd reported the irregularity. He'd noticed inconsistencies in a colleague's client reporting, the same kind of red flag that had ended his own career once before. And instead of staying quiet the way he might have 5 years earlier, he'd escalated it through proper channels. I sat with that information for a long time after Patricia's call ended. I won't pretend it rewrote everything Mark had done to me or erased the years of rebuilding I'd had to do alone. It didn't undo the divorce, the debt, the nights I'd cried in a car outside a courthouse. But it told me something I hadn't expected to learn. That the version of accountability I'd offered him in that conference room, the choice to let the process work fairly instead of burying him out of spite, had actually mattered. It had changed something in how he operated, even if only a little, even if only because he understood now what it felt like to almost lose everything over a decision to hide the truth. A few weeks later, at our daughter's school recital, Mark and I ended up standing near each other in the crowded auditorium lobby afterward, both of us waiting our turn to congratulate her. It was the first time in years our conversation wasn't tense or clipped. "I heard about what happened at Holloway," I said quietly. "The report you filed." He looked surprised, I knew, then nodded slowly. After everything with you, the interview, the document I had to sign, I kept thinking about what you said. About not building your life on things people don't know about." He paused. "I didn't want to be that person anymore. Not just for my career, for the kids too." I didn't tell him it fixed anything between us. It didn't, not entirely. And I wasn't interested in performing forgiveness I didn't fully feel yet. But I told him I was glad he'd made that choice, and I meant it. Driving home that night, I thought about how strange it was that the moment I'd expected to be my final reckoning with Mark, the interview, the signature, the closing of that chapter, hadn't been the end of the story after all. It had just been the beginning of a different one, quieter, slower, built on something neither of us had had in our marriage: honesty. Even when it costs something, I still don't know if Mark and I will ever be more than cordial co-parents. I'm not sure that matters anymore. What matters is that the woman who once sat shaking in that courthouse parking lot is gone, replaced by someone who rebuilt her whole life from almost nothing, and who, when finally handed the power to destroy the person who broke her, chose instead to become someone she could actually respect. That, in the end, was the real victory. Not his downfall. My own becoming.